So you're trying to move through space, and you're trying to keep the bad things from happening, and you're trying to figure out who the Cylon is. Once you figured out who the Cylon is, the worst that you can do to them is lock them up in the brig. Now, once they're in the brig, normally a person can play 2 skill checks to meet skill opportunities. While they're in the brig, they can only use 1. And so that becomes the only hindrance that you can really do to a Cylon. They can dance around on Battlestar Galactica and say, I'm a Cylon, I'm a Cylon, and all you can do is lock them in the brig. And you have to be successful in locking them in the brig, and you have to be successful in keeping them in the brig. Um, but at any point, they can decide to declare themselves as a Cylon and move over to the Cylon fleet location of the board. Meanwhile, at that point, they get more direct control over what they're doing. Uh, but the idea is you keep flipping over these mission cards. Each mission card has an objective. You either meet it or you fail it, and then you do the results, and then you either jump or the Cylon fleet that may be in the area may attack you. And the further you go, you start jumping again. You jump, you jump, you jump. And then once you get to 8, the fleet has reached its final destination and either wins or loses depending on how many resources they have left at that point. If you ever run out of resources, including on your final jump, then you lose the game as the humans. If you do not make it before you run out of resources, you obviously lose the game. And so the Cylons are trying to prevent you from doing that, and as humans, you're trying to get there successfully. So let's talk about how we feel about the game Battlestar Galactica. The fun factor of the game. Do you want to start?
It's fun. It is. The game itself is it's fun. It works. I like it, but there are times that there's just you're not really sure what to do.
Well, I'd say one of the issues is that it's a co-op game, and co-op games generally tend to be pretty hit or miss on how the game mechanics work. And in this case, I think it works pretty well overall for most of the game, in which you're not sure who the Cylon is, and then you're building up towards accusing certain people and throwing them in the brig and things like that. And then there are other times when you're thrown in the brig and you know you're not the Cylon, but because you're in the brig, there's not a whole lot you can do except try to convince your way out of things. And there's just not many game mechanics for that sort of thing. Once you're thrown in the brig, you can only play 1 card in order to help you get yourself out. And sometimes that's not enough, especially if there's a Cylon or 2 Cylons pushing against you to keep you in the brig. There's not a lot that you can do about that. So the limited options really come into play when you're in a situation like you have been revealed as the Cylon, or you're in the brig, or something like that. There's just not a lot you can do in those situations.
I must point out that I really, really love games that have the hidden traitor mechanic.
Yeah.
Any game where you don't know if you're the entire game you're trying to figure it out. Is he the traitor? Is he working against me secretly? Does he really not have that card? That kind of thing. I love that. But in the respect of not having things to do, there's just times where you'll go, okay, it's my turn. Well, there's nothing really I can do that will help anything.
Yeah.
Nothing can hurt. So you just find yourself just putting it on random spaces just so you can have something to do.
And in certain circumstances, you'll be going and finding and drawing more cards just so you can do something that is valuable. Right. Sometimes there won't be any ships out in space, so there's no need to do any ship combat. And sometimes, trying to accuse someone and putting them in the brig is going to hurt you more than it's going to help you. There's just situations like that. But overall, I think that the game works pretty well as a co-op game, especially with the hidden traitor mechanic. The game isn't necessarily balanced the best in the world.
It's hard.
It's hard, especially to begin with, for the humans. In order to win against the Cylons, it's really hard to begin with. Then once you start knowing the mechanics and how to manipulate things and just use some of the card abilities, it starts to become easier for the humans and harder for the Cylons. The game does balance pretty well. Generally, you will have traitors in it, but there may not be traitors from the beginning of the game. There's a sleeper agent phase through the half of the game, and that just adds to the enjoyment because you don't know, maybe there isn't a traitor at this point, but you're still going to be accusing and second-guessing everybody's decisions in the game based on whether or not you are whether or not you think they are a traitor. And I think that's a really interesting mechanic. And a lot of co-op games, they get into the habit of being kind of a tell each other what to do kind of game, where one person that's really dominant will tell everybody else, you should go here and do this. And that happens to an extent in this game, but because everybody's so secretive, because even if you're not the Cylon, you don't want to blatantly seem like you're not the Cylon, because when you are the Cylon, then you're screwed, because everybody will know the change of behavior there. So, I really like how they did the hidden traitor mechanic in this game. So, as far as fun factor goes, I think the game is pretty hot. I mean, it's high up there. It gets a little old after a while, just because there's not a lot of variety to the game. There's only so many places you can go and visit, and there's only so many types of cards. There's political cards and tactics cards and piloting cards, engineering and leadership, and each type of cards only has 2 abilities. You'll have a whole big stack of cards, and amongst the stack of cards there'll be 2 abilities. Now, each one will have different power rating with different numbers, and they can help you in different situations, but as far as using them as abilities, there's not a lot of variety.
There isn't.
And the rooms, there's not a lot of variety. And when you're going through the different cards that happen, you would think that there's a lot of cards that move the fleet, but there's not a lot of cards that bring in the fleet. And I think it ends up being like 1 out of every 7 cards will actually bring in fleet. And I just wish there was more fleet interaction in the game.
Right. There's, it's just a matter of the game. It'll start to go on. You'll pretty much, be able to guess how things are going.
And then there will be complete lulls in the game where nothing's happening in that regard.
Which where I want to point out the hard thing. One of these, when they get low, I think it's is it fuel? Fuel is when it gets down to 0, the humans lose. Period. And there's
any of them when it gets down to 0, but the problem is with fuel, it is really hard to get fuel back. Like with food and population, morale, stuff like that, there are things in the game that will give it back to you. There's almost never an occasion where not only will it give you some back, but there are very few cards that will let you travel without it. So every time you jump, you need to use fuel. There is a few exceptions, but not many. So once that starts getting to a certain point, you're just screwed.
Right.
And you might as well not even continue with the game at that point.
So when those cards come up that keep taking away your fuel, you pretty much know, well, nothing good's going to come from this.